This one, 9 months after leaving office, former President Trump is continuing to double down on debunked claims of election fraud. He released a statement urging Republicans to opt out of voting in the 2022 midterm elections and the 2024 presidential election if, quote, we don't solve the presidential election fraud of 2020. This comes as a Georgia judge this week dismissed a lawsuit from Trump supporters requesting an election audit. Another blow to the former president's claims about the 2020 election. So joining us right now to talk about all of this, Niall Stanage, a columnist at The Hill and somebody who's an expert in all things Washington. So let's talk about it. The former president has hit this dead end with each and every lawsuit his allies have brought forth in questioning election integrity, most recently in Georgia. But to tell Republicans to sit this next one out, ultimately to boycott a massive vote, a most important vote in this country, is that even possible?
Well, it's a very rare example, I think, of President Trump delighting Democrats, Adrienne. If that actually happened, if Republicans were to stay away from the polls, the only people it benefits is the Democratic Party. Democrats are really quite happy about this demand or suggestion from the former president. And there are a lot of Republicans around this town who are basically cringing because they worry about the effects of him taking that position.
But wouldn't it, I mean, I'm thinking this is the theory that if there were not Republicans voting in the election, then ultimately the vote would be thrown out. It wouldn't be an actual vote. You would just have to start over again. So are Republicans actually giving any perspective other than this is crazy?
Well, you see, I don't think that it is possible for the former president to command a sort of uniform boycott by Republican voters. He may get his hardcore supporters to stay away, but I don't think that would in any sense delegitimize the election. And what Republicans here are concerned about is a similar situation to the one that happened in Georgia, which you'll remember in January, Adrienne, where there were two Senate runoffs. The former president was then in the midst of his claims of election fraud, and amid depressed Republican turnout, Democrats won both of those seats.
We have obviously reported this ultimately time and time again, that the president is rumored to be considering a 2024 bid for the White House, traveling the country now with these Save America rallies. But what ultimately is he trying to accomplish in terms of a successful campaign if he's encouraging Republicans to sit out?
Right now, I think he's trying to accomplish keeping himself center stage politically. It's traditionally a problem for people who get defeated in elections that they become marginalized. Former President Trump has worked very hard to avoid that fate, even as he has been banned from social media platforms. You mentioned the rallies that he has done that are very campaign-style rallies. So I think it's really about keeping him relevant and keeping his profile as high as possible if he should want to run again in 2024.
But don't you think that there are a lot of people, at least a section of the Republican Party that is actually on his side, that believes that he was defrauded in spite of the results that we've seen that say that there was no fraud?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's clearly a significant proportion of the Republican Party and of Republican voters who believe the last election was illegitimate. Now, I think it behooves us to say it wasn't illegitimate. It was a fair election. There has been no evidence of widespread fraud. But that claim certainly has a certain amount of traction among Republican voters, and particularly those Republicans most supportive of the former president.
Yes, and I think that's something that everyone, Democrats and Republicans alike, have to consider as we move forward with this country and towards 2024. Thank you so much, Niall, for being with us.